joined, about another 60 seconds and get going. So it's just a couple more seconds here. Let's know attendees join. Let's get this webinar started. This is our customer-facing webinar around avoiding cyber threats with CloudSecurity, which will, of course, include some products that we sell and some solutions that we represent here at RapidScale, but also some best practices. I'm joined today by Daryl Stitt, who is our new Director of Client Experience. He will introduce himself in just a moment. I'm Dylan Bowders, Senior Solutions Engineer. I've heard me on a couple of these webinars, try and hop on and do ones when I can, when I'm not traveling and out working with our partners managers and client experience managers. This webinar, as always, will be recorded and available via a link. Darryl, if you could go to the next slide. Will be sent within 24 hours for the attendees. So, of course, if you have any questions about the presentation, there is a Q&A section in the webinar or in the WebEx console. If you have any questions, please feel free to type those over, and we'll answer those once we're through the deck. And with that, I would like to introduce Daryl Stitt, our Client Experience Director. Daryl?
Everyone. As Dylan mentioned, my name is Daryl Stitt, and I joined RapidScale as a Director of Experience. I come with IT Director experience background. Basically, my goal here at RapidScale is to enhance and accelerate the rapid mission, providing a world-class white glove client experience for you and your business. So with that said, let's get started. So with cybersecurity, security is typically not the most popular subject within an organization, and happens. And then it's typically not the most popular topic as you're going through discovery and mitigation of security events. And so here, what we'd like to do is highlight some national and global statistics for you to kind of review. We won't go through each one of these, but just know that cybersecurity and cyber challenge faces every day. Unfortunately, you can't see a lot of these. Actually, they're in cyberspace. They're going across the internet. There's bots. So 24/7, there's activity out there that's looking to affect business. Here on this, in regards to statistics,
these are some of these are maybe a tiny bit dated, and by dated because month on month these types of things change. But I think it paints a pretty clear picture of how serious and how active malicious security threats are, and how dynamic they are when it really comes down to it. So
the goal here is to, as IT and business professionals, is to plan for security and don't be forced into this discussion. So how do we protect ourselves? And so here's 5 buckets, internal attack vectors across the that affect business today. Some of these maybe are pretty familiar to you, most likely. If not, we'll go through these real quick. So malware, it's in malicious content. Typically comes through in email attack vector. Ransomware, the same thing. It's ransomware is malicious software that's in that can be edited, on a computer. You open up an email, click a link, etc. DDoS attack is a little more advanced attack on the net, where very bot networks will target a single company, etc., and just through sheer force of bandwidth, flooding can affect a business negatively. Phishing typically is another engineering mechanism, and content vector attack. And last but not least is another web application attacks, which are more commonly a little more advanced, but still anyone hacking any one of these vectors. Unfortunately, for us as business professionals, something we need to be aware of, that it's very easy to do. You can download an attack content, package on the internet within 10 minutes with relatively little. You can create an attack, send it out to thousands of email accounts, and just sit back and wait for people to click links from your spam email. So, what can we do about it? So with RapScale, we believe in a layered approach, and so showing what this slide here is showing is the 3 attack vectors, and the layered approach that we take here at RapScale from the remote office, in the production environment, and then naturally what can we do from a mitigation disaster recovery perspective. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dylan to about each one of these attack vectors and what mechanisms we can deploy.
One thing I actually want to kind of additional color to the transition from the previous slide to this slide is that it's seeing the different angles that are taken when a malicious party really sets their mind to it, and as the security exploits build and evolve over time. 10 years ago, we would have really understood what some of these were. I mean, DDoS attacks were a thing. They weren't common. They were typically targeting large organizations that were considered, a target. Not to be confused with the retail outlet, but not to the retail outlet. So I think what's interesting is, and for 10 years, what this list is going to look like. And I think that kind of paints a picture that we don't necessarily want to say, here's malware, here's a product to best protect you against malware. Here's ransomware, here's the best product to protect against ransomware, et cetera. I think the idea is, and this is the translation to the next slide, is that we have different levels that we can implement security, and ultimately, by implementing these different levels, we're protecting ourselves as well as possible, not only against known attacks and known threats, but we're putting the components in place to continue to evolve with those malicious angle of attack and continue to protect not only the data for the company, but also the reputation of the company. Very, very few, I think, evaluations of security consider bits of things that can pose an impact to the company's reputation, which, of course, especially for a publicly traded company, can have a very serious financial impact. It may not be a HIPAA fine. It may not be a PCI fine. It may not be that they've gotten some kind of credit card information or something of that sort. It could be we've fired off a DDoS attack, and the credit union's web interface is down, and even though they don't process actual transactions on their web page, it gets passed off to a third party. Your average end user doesn't know that, and maybe it's not even a DDoS attack. Maybe they've defaced the web page, haven't actually thing with sensitive data, but the reputation of that company is now at risk, and almost certainly going to have some kind of financial impact that's hard to put a finger on. So I'll real quickly use an analogy that I like to use with this image, and I'll probably try to evolve this to maybe more represent this analogy than some boxes and lines and arrows. But if you think of your house, and you think of a neighborhood, your house is going to be the box in the middle, your production environment. This is your primary place of residence. Let's ignore the boxes on the side, because once you get the middle and you understand what we're doing here from a security perspective, you get the rest of it. So with your house, the primary mechanism for security with a network and with any house is your front door. That's going to be your firewall. A good firewall. You want to have a good lock on the front door, but because that lock, you don't have any external level security or implementation for security. You have literally thousands of people a day come front door with a key, and it fit in the hole, but it might fit in the hole, and it may not turn, but at some point it's going to turn. And there isn't going to be some kind of alert that says somebody got through your firewall, because the firewall's not that intelligent. Even next-gen firewalls aren't quite that intelligent. They get better with things like intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. But if you're hanging all of your company's reputation and financial reputation and numbers on that level alone, you're almost only asking for it. We have additional layers of security. So let's try and prevent as many people from getting to the front door as possible. And this is where we use things like Mimecast and Encapsula. And they're very similar in what they do from a premise It's basically taking these specific types, email, website, certain websites, and we're scrubbing that information because we need email to be delivered to a mail server, and it may not be on site, but it may be in the cloud. It may be Office 365. It may be something else, Rapid multi-tenant exchange, or it may be a website. Maybe you're hosting it at your business. Maybe you're hosting it within Network Solutions or GoDaddy, but the impact to the reputation potentially is the same. We want to put products in place, solutions in place, to prevent people from even getting into our neighborhood. So we gate a perimeter gate around our neighborhood, gated community. We're going to have a guard at the front and going to be inspecting all of the people coming in the neighborhood. And if they're not supposed to be in the neighborhood, they don't get in. So that these external services, cloud scrubbing services do for us with Encapsula and Mimecast is, let's just stop it before it even gets to the front door. Let that in here inside the house. If all you have is a lock on your front door and somebody happens to get in, unless you're home and scrounging around your servers, you're not going to know they're there. They're going to be in your kids' room. They're going to be in the kitchen. They're going to be wherever. So Alien Vault and Micro with deep security, and in other situations where it's remote laptops and things of that sort, web root, but we're talking about inside the house, not your car, which would be, I guess, equated to a laptop. With Alien Vault, this is the internal security system. It's the door sensor that beeps when the door opens. It's motion sensors that turn on lights. It's video recording that records when there's motion detected. Glass break sensors, noise sensors, all of the things that you could get in a modern, house security system. This is kind of similar to what Alien Vault does on the inside of your server environment. We have agents that go on every server. We understand the role of the server. We understand what files should be changing and what files shouldn't be changing. We're inspecting the traffic going to and from the server. We're looking at events coming from the front door or the firewall. We're looking at events coming from Encapsula. So the guard's going to call us and tell us there's a thing, we didn't let this person in. So now we can start to correlate these different events. So the guy didn't get in the front gate. Somehow he got into the firewall, maybe, and there's some different reasons why that might happen. Not if things are configured properly. Start to correlate these different events and spawn alerts that can be evaluated by a security operations center. And obviously, we'd love for those phones to consider rapid scale security services, but the general concept here is that there's a human being that's looking at these artificial intelligence, basically generated alerts that come up into a screen, and then we can evaluate the alert and take action on that, whether that's an escalation to the customer's IT department or it's hopping into the environment because we manage the environment. Those are things that, different scenarios based on the application or the area that we're applying the security services. Another kind of additional security option that's out there on the top left and top right is do two-factor authentication, which is basically not only do I have a car that I'm coming in with, but I also have some kind of a code as I go to the front gate to say, here's my driver's license and here's my name, and I've got all of my verification, so now I can get in. Citrix Zen Mobile would be a way of saying, my teenagers have a car. I want to make sure that when they leave, everything's safe, everything is good. So these are going to be like laptops that are going out in the field, cell phones that are out in the field. We want to make sure that the company's data is not only protected, but we can take action on that data if for some reason it gets into the wrong hands or we suspect it's not in the right hands. And that's where Citrix Zen Mobile comes into play. It's mobile device management and mobile application management. With that, if there are any questions, of course, please type them into the Q&A field on the right. There's a lot to digest there, but I think hopefully we're painting a picture that we have a multi-layered approach to evaluating security, and we're not necessarily going to every customer and saying you need to buy all these things, but we are taking at least a reasonable approach to understanding the business, understanding what the needs are, what the requirements are, what the sort of certifications may be that are required, whether it's SOX or PCI or HIPAA, and then we're able to leverage these solutions to put in place. And talk about a couple of the additional features of cloud security, and this is really just a couple of our product sets that make up the cloud security portfolio. One of them is USM, and Unified Security Management is Alien Vault if we put an actual logo on it. So these are things like being able to do asset discovery. What that is, anytime a new virtual machine comes online, we know that there's something that isn't already known. Now, of course, it probably was legitimately deployed into the environment, but we need to classify it so that the next time we scan it, we understand what it is. And if for some reason there's a virus that's brought online in the environment that we don't want in, that's going to be a huge red flag. How did it happen? Who's doing it? What's the virtual machine doing? And then we go in and kind of full lockdown and understand what's going on. Some of the additional items here, if you haven't heard of SIEM, which is Security Information and Events Manager, it's a common term used with internal security solutions. That's one of the components of Alien Vault. So if a customer comes to us and says, I need a SIEM, we're likely to talk about Alien Vault, but we're going to talk about the additional things that it does. Vulnerability assessment is a big one, especially with PCI. So what that does is we look at all of the virtual machines in the environment. We scan them, not really intrusively, but we're scanning them in ways that a normal firewall wouldn't let you, because it's going to say, well, what are you doing this port scan for? We can do that on the inside of the network because we're going to allow that to happen. And now we can look and see, is there an outdated version of software? Is there something that needs to be patched? Are there ports that shouldn't be open, and maybe they should be closed and locked down at the host level? So we're going to get things as tight as possible. For Witchers, and this is the Encapsula product, and like AWOL, we can talk about each one of these things for an hour easily to introduce the product. But this is basically your company's website. What company is hosting sensitive data on that website or not? Again, we want to consider the reputation of the company as well. We can put the industry-leading firewall solution in place so that we're inspecting all traffic going to that web server, doing a very deep analysis of that traffic to ensure that we're only allowing legitimate traffic to go to the target, or what we call an origin address. And for return traffic coming from the web server, we're going to catch that. So we're doing content acceleration, which is an intelligent or adhering to static API headers. We're able to do inline and transparent DDoS mitigation. So if you receive an attack that's been mitigated, your website does not even go down for us for a split second. Your legitimate users don't know the difference. The attacker has wasted their money, or they're going to move on to somebody else. And that can be done in a very proactive manner or a reactive manner. These solutions, like for instance with Encapsula, can be implemented in a reactive manner if necessary. It's just typically a bit more costly to do it reactively versus proactively. There's balancing features. There's authentication that can be implemented with this particular solution. So think of WordPress. If you're familiar with WordPress, it's the most popular, and because of the most popular content management system on the internet, it's also the most vulnerable, because if there's millions of WordPress websites out there, and I want to get the bang for my buck when I'm writing a script to exploit one of these content management systems, I'm going to pick the most popular one. Protect the back end of the WordPress site so that only authorized users with registered authentication mechanisms like cell phones or an authentication application on a cell phone can actually get access to that back-end login. Can integrate this with the Alien Vault USM security solution as well. Then I'll go ahead and touch on some Mimecast features on the next slide. Mimecast, very similar again to that Encapsula solution, except we're focusing strictly on email. That's both incoming and outgoing email, which means we can implement not only DLP, which is digital leak prevention, implement policies that say, if you recognize a string of numbers that matches what a social security number would look like, or a credit card number, or an account number, because we've written a custom regex policy to match what the company's account numbers look like. We can flag those as they're going out of the system. So your user has already made a mistake. They've already sent something that has sensitive information in it, but Mimecast, harder than that, it's told, and we can actually stop that message from being sent to that destination. We're going to be scanning for things like malware, phishing, and what's called targeted threat, which could be very specific to a user, or we can use well, I forget the exact term for it now, but it's basically taking a domain name like Mimecast, and if you look at the second M in Mimecast, and you take that, and instead of an M, you use an R and an N, so Romeo, Nancy, or November. Put them together. There's a small gap between the R and the N, but if you glance at it, it looks like an M. That's a real domain name that was an exploit that had been used against Mimecast, and similar types of situations like that. Of course, if there's an M in any domain name, that's one mechanism that could be used to try to phish, one of your employees or one of your customers. Mimecast is a very popular product for us. It's one of the first things we recommend because email is one of the most exploited mechanisms from a security perspective.
So as you mentioned, so specifically with Mimecast, it not only or enhances the security features from inbound email, but again, if you have an organization where you're concerned about internal leakage going outbound as well, that's whether it be PII information or account information, et cetera. So you're protecting both inbound and outbound, which I think is a very critical call out with regards to what Mimecast and how Mimecast can enhance the security.
Exactly. And in a sense, and in both cases, because we'll protect the web server as well with Encapsulate, in a sense, we're protecting the internet from the organization in case something were to happen with a spam bot inside of the company's mail server, or there's a backdoor on the web server, those types of things. So those solutions are very comprehensive and looking at traffic in both directions.
Through a case study with the use today, and specifically, this is a real life case study that we thought we'd present, show what the security concern, our challenge was, and then how we could, how RapidScale can partner with you to mitigate and enhance security moving forward. So in this particular case study, it was a manufacturing organization, and they had breach specifically due to password or lack thereof. So as I said, there's a lot of bots out there, and just folks scripts, and they just use attacks on common accounts out there on websites, etc. To log in remotely. So with that said, Dylan, you want to run through specific what the customer needs were and how we were able to add value?
Yeah, and this particular customer is bound by some compliances. They have all the boxes that need to be checked for compliance requirements. That doesn't mean they have everything that could possibly be implemented, but they have a relatively strong security position when it comes to their policies and their procedures, and when it comes to the solutions they have in place. If you go back, and I'm not, Daryl, don't need to go back, but if the attendees can think back to the diagram that we showed you earlier, there's a lot of different levels of security and things that we can do. This particular customer had some of them. Again, they checked the boxes for requirements, but the particular scenario was somehow, and we still don't know how, because once I explain it, you'll realize it's very difficult to track down. One of the employees' passwords sat in the wrong hands. Password policies in the organization are set to be passwords every X number of days to meet compliance requirements. They need to be complex passwords, so they're not just cat, dog, or base. So they're relatively complex based on Microsoft's rules for complexity. And users know to not write them down. Now, that doesn't mean that nobody writes their passwords down. And to be honest, again, we don't know exactly how this party got access to this user's account, but they essentially got access to their email account. And without going into specifics, there was a financial hit to one of their customers because they had received instructions from seemingly one of the employees of this company. So the reason I think I like this example isn't because we can say, well, it only had this product or this product, and we had sold them this thing, they would have been protected. In this case, to be honest with you, it was more around the holistic approach to security and enforcing and ensuring that the employees are doing the right things. Now, that's not the end-all, be-all, because exploits happen with no impact or no involvement of an employee, but it's oftentimes a component, and there's rarely sufficient education on a regular basis. That it's on the call here, understand and realize that the basic approach to security doesn't stop with a product and a logo and one of our engineers looking at a screen. Needs to also incorporate your use and good policies and ongoing education that probably going to evolve every year. Again, back to that list of exploits and things that can happen from a high-level perspective, that's going to continue to evolve, and so should the training. Maybe they'd be using some password management software. I personally use password management software. I think I know 2 passwords. My password that logs me onto my work laptop, and the password that gets me into my password program. And then all my passwords are not only do I know them, but they're all different, and I never them. So that's pretty security. Even if one of my accounts was to somehow get exploited, they're not going to have access to any other account because they'd have to go through the whole process again, however they did it, and try and figure out what my other passwords are. And then it's just not going to be useful to them. There's plenty of other more vulnerable people out there. So things that we did in this scenario, because we did have some things after we understood what happened, we did have some things that we could implement to reduce the risk. And you can't completely eliminate human error, but to reduce the risk of this happening again. And these are some services that we had already talked to the customer about at one point. It wasn't a high priority. It was on the roadmap to be considered in the future. Unfortunately, we didn't get to that before this exploit happened. So one of those things was implementing encapsulate of not only their web page, but Outlook Web Access, point. I like to call them web property. And with that, we were able to block trees that have no business accessing those web pages. So with Outlook Web Access and with remote Outlook access, we're only allowing that they do business in. If you're traveling from outside of that area, we're going to have 2-factor authentication in place so you can actually get through, but only a small subset of users need that. So the country that showed up in our reporting from this particular exploit was a country that had no business accessing their environment, and we would have prevented this from happening just with that in place. But we're doing some additional things. We're implementing some additional security, like the 2-factor authentication. We're doing some internal vulnerability scans, some external vulnerability scans, and just go a little bit further above and beyond what the defaults are for their compliance and their checkboxes. So there's a couple of tips that we have covered of these, but I'll just kind of go over them very quickly. You have effective training. So I touched on that already. Not only do you want to do training and do it on a regular basis, but it needs to be effective. It needs to cover the most recent attacks. It needs to really challenge your employees to think about the things that they're doing on a daily basis when it comes to the company's data and their management of that data, which of course includes their own passwords. Going to keep your software up to date. Make sure that the workstations are patched and are continuously evaluated for vulnerabilities. Obviously, back up your data. Using the right tools, so antivirus programs, password programs, making sure that you have all the right things in place. And if you don't know what those need to be, or if you just want to run some ideas by us, of course, please reach out to Daryl's team, and they'll loop in the appropriate technical resource, whether it's myself or one of my counterparts on the solutions engineering team, and we can have those conversations with you. And it very well may not lead to some kind of gain on the rapid scale side, but certainly it's going to lead to a gain with you because you'll understand better your position and maybe some things you can do, even if they don't cost your company any money, some things you can do to better your position from a security perspective. So, Daryl, I'll let you take over and introduce your team.
Yeah, thank you. So as we wrap up here, here's the account management team here at Rapid Scale, and together, we form your account management focal of any additional questions with regards to cloud security, with specifically in Mimecast or any other opportunity or challenge that you think you to broach the subject with us. We're here for you. Please contact us anytime, and we can discuss any new business initiatives, and together we can help you match technology solutions deal with those said challenges. So with that, we want to just see if there's any quick little questions with regards to the webinar today. So Summer, is it real quick?
Just like any came across on the Q&A in the webinar. So
right, well,
obviously, if anybody has questions, reach out to Daryl and his team if you didn't already know your account client experience manager.
Thank you for joining the webinar today. And again, we will email, if the webinar will be available, we will email us out as well. So thank you for your time, and we will see you next time.